Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Minasan konnichiwa. Welcome to Jarvis In Japan Podcast, a podcast where me, Jarvis, a data scientist nomad in Japan, give you stories and interesting stuff about, well, my travel and life in Japan. And right now, I'm getting back into tea. Yes, tea. But not English tea. Japanese. Ocha. Matcha and tea ceremony. I want to become what is called a chame. What's a named tea ceremony practitioner. Means you're pro at tea. At doing tea ceremony. So I've been studying a lot about tea recently. So in today's episode, we're just going to talk about what is tea. What is Japanese tea? Why is it different from like English tea? And some interesting facts I've learned about tea over the last few days, because I've been studying a lot about tea. And I've been drinking a lot too. So it should be a very, very drinkable episode. So get some tea and come along. So first up, we're going to talk what is tea in Japanese. Tea in Japanese is ocha. Cha. So the cha originates from China. As you got unyomi and kanyomi, the Japanese style readings, but it's actually interesting that in Chinese also there's te for tea. And it's actually imports. One's going for the Western world, and the other to Japan is actually how. So in England we call it tea. Got the name. So the tea name actually got imported to Europe, as the cha got imported westwards to Japan, and now we call it ocha. And this is when the imports from China was really getting on with Japan in the sort of late 800 BC. Is when Japan started really having missionaries going to China to learn about this Chinese culture. Because in the 18th, when it was around 800 BC, it's not BC, AC, or after Christ here, this sort of China, well, it was BC, China was a super wealthy nation, they are now, but they were the world leaders in like technology, sophistication, and tea. And some of the missionary monks went to China, brought back this tea with them, and this started a culture, sort of like the start of tea ceremony, what we know today in the royal households of Japan. The rich and wealthy, they would enjoy this tea, so that, well, we're a sophisticated nation now, we can drink dirty water. But it wasn't really until the 11th century and sort of Heian and Kamakura Jidai, the Kamakura periods in Japan, I think the 11th century? Yeah. We got a guy called Eisai, who was one of these other Chinese missionaries, but he brought back with him how you make the tea. Ooh, that's the interesting part, right? Because they stopped just importing it from China, they started making their own tea. And one in particular he brought back with him was matcha. Ooh. And this Eisai character was quite smart in a way. He brought back with him the ways to produce teas, but he also brought back the ways of drinking them. He also started cafes, sort of tea drinking places, and got the custom going around normal people. Well, because if he's going to make tea, he needs people to sell it. And the rich and royals, there's only a few of them. And it really started taking off in Japan with the monks. As monks, well, they would do a lot of meditation for all day, and you get a bit sleepy if you do meditation for a long while. If you've done like 2 hours, 3 hours meditation before, you may realize you might fall asleep a little bit and be a bit drowsy afterwards, because you are nearly in a sleep-deprived state. So if this sort of after meditation practice tea was drinking, that started making bigger, more popular in Japan, and this tea culture went around. We got fun games like Tocha. What's battle tea? What? Battle tea? Yes, battle tea. It's basically like the wine tasting game, but for tea. And this actually got banned in like the Edo period of Japan from the 16th to the 18th century, because it kind of got a little bit out of hand. Like, people were literally betting their houses on how good they can taste tea. Like, it's just, imagine that for wine tasting, right? Like, I guess like this is the rosé on my car. Like, it got a bit crazy. Why people banned it? Because people love their tea. So I'll just give you a little bit of story about Japanese tea there, but what is the difference in Japanese tea? So, But let's talk about now in the next part of Jin Japan, what different types of tea? That's always a good question to ask. What really is tea? Yeah. So stick around for that one. So, tea, well, the tea we know in the UK is basically fermented leaves from a plant called Teaceae plant. Teaceae leaves. And there's lots of variations of these leaves, but the way you treat the leaves to make the tea is literally what's the difference between green tea and sort of English tea, culture, in Japanese. And the main difference is fermentation. If you ferment the tea just a little bit, you get oolong-cha, oolong tea. If you do it totally fermented, leave it a long time, let it grow a little bit, that's when you get culture, like black tea, English tea, what we call today. And if you don't ferment it at all, just leave it as it is, this is how you get the green tea, ocha, rukcha, you call it in Japanese. And inside the Japanese tea, there's even more variations, would depend on how you treat it after that. So green tea is not fermented leaves. So you have these fermented leaves, then what you do with them? So in the Japanese, you mushu, you boil them up, basically. It's probably actually mushu is more steaming. So you steam these leaves, and after you steam these leaves, what you do with them next, or how long you steam the leaves for, determine what type of tea you really make. If you leave it for about an hour steaming, you get futsu zencha. Zencha, basically normal Japanese green tea. You leave it a lot longer, you get a more stronger taste comes out, as you lose quite a lot of the small leaves, sort of the stems of the leaf, and you're just left with lots of the terrene stuff. So what makes it strong in taste. And then if you give more lighter, so you don't steam it for as long, you get a more lighter taste, but it has a lot of sort of the stems and stuff left over from the leaf, and some people don't like that. But it gives a more tea sort of smell. But that's just basic tea. But Japan has that other type of tea, that is the matcha. Very, very famous. So what is this matcha tea? So matcha tea is a special type of tea that you're not letting it, directly under sunlight. Basically, you cover the tea leaves in nets. So when they grow up, when they're planted, they never really have direct impact of the sun. And this in Japanese is called tencha. And I haven't really tasted this tea, so I don't really know the difference between this tencha and normal tea. I will try after this episode, because I've been looking up this a lot. I'm like, ooh, so much tea I need to try. But after that phase, you steam it, like with the other tea, let it dry, and then you grind it up into very, very small, fine pieces. And that's when you get matcha. It's basically grinded tea when it's never seen sunlight. Well, it has seen sunlight, but it's not been directly under it. It's always been covered. It's been protected from the harsh rays. So it's a well-raised tea, then blended to death. Ooh. And this process of matcha really develops its unique style and taste in Japan. There is Chinese matcha plants now, what are still probably very good and as popular, ironically, because most of the matcha you get in Europe and America now is the Chinese variety, and most people won't know the difference because it's still good tea. But in Japan, matcha comes with more of a cultural aspect as well. We have the tea ceremony, wabi-sabi, and these sort of cultural practices what affected Japan's history in a way. And especially this one character in Japanese history who, with the use of tea, maybe you could say that he influenced Japanese history in a massive way. He was Sen Norikyu, And Senno Q will be the theme of next episode of Jarvis in Japan, because, well, he's a fascinating character who lived a very, very interesting life in the warring states period of Japan. In a time of total war, there was one man who was focused solely on tea, and he kind of became one of the best friends of Old Nobunaga, one of the defining warlords who unified Japan, so he had extremely strong influence. And it makes a great story for a podcast. So stick around and subscribe for the next episode. And if you like this podcast, the content I make, please subscribe and leave a comment, especially if you listen to on iTunes. For that, if you leave a comment and meet me and show me you made that comment, I will make you tea. Yes, that is a promise. And I'm also doing some other things as well. I'm doing trash collections now, so if you try and pick up one piece of trash every day, please use the hashtag Kyou no Ichigomi if you're in Japanese, or today's trash if you're in England land. And finally, before we wrap up, there's one last thing, is that I'm doing a charity fundraiser with my friend Melania to raise money for rural Nepali girls in indigenous regions who don't really have access to high quality education and sanitary goods. Especially if you're young girls, you don't have these sanitary goods, stuff goes wrong, right? So we're doing a little fundraiser for them, and the link down that will be below. If you donate anything, share, that'd be much appreciated. So as always, 皆さん最後まで聞いてくれて本当にありがとうございました。お茶美味しいですね。いいですね、お茶。